Welcome, everyone. This is the PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating podcast. Here we chat about all things boating with marine industry professionals and enthusiasts who spend all the time they can out on the water.
Hi, this is Tanya Becker, and I'm your host for today's episode of PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating. I'm joined by my guest, Mike O'Malley, who's a great looper, or maybe a little loopy. Probably most accurately, both a great looper and a little bit loopy. In all seriousness, I've recently learned more about the Great Loop, and we've connected with a number of people who have completed the loop. I'm fascinated by the journey, but even more so by how each boater approaches the adventure in very different ways. We'll be talking with a number of boaters who have completed the Great Loop over the upcoming weeks and months, but Mike is the first of the series. Thanks for being with me here today, Mike.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Since this is our first discussion about the Great Loop, Mike, could you describe the geographical parameters of the loop for our listeners?
Sure. So the Great Loop is the eastern part of the United States is surrounded by water. And so the water would be the Great Lakes, the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, the Tombigbee Waterway, the Gulf of Mexico, the Intercoastal Waterway going all the way up to Albany, New York, the Erie Canal, and then back into the Great Lakes. The interesting thing about the Great Loop is you can start anywhere, and then you end up where you started. So I'm from Chicago, so I started actually from St. Joe's, Michigan, because that's where we bought the boat. But other people start in Florida, they start in Alabama, they'll start in New York City. So there's no one starting place. And when you get back to where you started, that's referred to as crossing your wake.
Ah, got it. Yeah, it's interesting. I included a link to the Great Loop map in the show notes so people can reference that. The map was created by the America's Great Loop Cruisers Association, which is a really interesting organization as well. And they did a great job on the map of breaking down all the common segments and even highlight some of the best of, restaurant sites and that kind of thing. So I think people will find that interesting. So, completing the Great Loop, Mike, requires a decent amount of commitment and planning. It's not something you just roll out of bed and do one day. How did you and why did you decide to start doing this at all?
I started to do this, and I didn't even know about the Great Loop when this whole thing started happening. So I have 4 brothers, and I'm number 4 out of 5 sons. And we have my brother Tom, who's the number 2 brother, because we all go by numbers, okay? And so the number 2 son lived in Miami, Florida, and my brother Jim and I, we had bought a pontoon boat many years ago, actually over 31 years ago. And Jim came up with this idea. And my brother Tom lives in Coral Gables, a very exclusive, ritzy area of Miami. And Jim's like, we should take this rickety old pontoon boat and drive it up to Tom's dock in front of his house so all his neighbors can look at like the Beverly Hillbillies showing up, because that's what our pontoon boat looked like. So that was the adventure. We were going to take the pontoon boat to Miami, and my brother started the trip, and he ended up he was going to take the boat as far as New Orleans because his 2 sons went to school in New Orleans at Loyola University, New Orleans. And then I was going to take the boat from New Orleans to Miami. Well, he broke the boat and in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and that ended this whole thing. So then over the next 8 years, I kept thinking about taking a great journey on a boat. And I looked for boats, kept looking for boats, and I decided a center console would be the perfect boat for me to do my great journey, thinking I'm only going to Miami. And then for some reason I was Googling, traveling down the Mississippi River. I came across this website called the AGLCA, the American Great Loop Cruising Association. And then I found out all about the loop. And then I'm like, okay, I can go to Florida, and I can also bring the boat back a different route, because I never thought about bringing it back up by water. So that's how I got involved in doing the Great Loop.
Interesting. Yeah, this Great Loop concept is new to me too, and it's I kind of want to do it now.
It's fun. You know what? Here's the thing. It's very easy to do. It's not difficult. And a lot of times people, once they accomplish a feat, they then want to make it seem like it was the hardest thing to do. And I tell people how easy it is to do, because you really can't get lost. You're always surrounded by land. So I came out of St. Joe's and I brought it over to Chicago. And Chicago was easy to find from St. Joe's because the Sears Tower, now known as the Willis Tower, was sticking up in the air. And I just put the nose of my boat on it and I went right towards it. And then I had a chart plotter with GPS coordinates to pull into Belmont Harbor. But then when we went down the Chicago River, land on both sides, went to the Illinois River, land on both sides, Mississippi River, land on both sides, Ohio River, that's where this big river with a lot of other boats are, you turn left. And then you take that, over to the Cumberland River, and then that's a right turn. And then you go in the Kentucky Lakes, and you follow the Kentucky Lakes down to the Tombigbee Waterway, and then you take that to Mobile, and there's land on both sides. And then you cross over the Gulf of Mexico, which is relatively easy to do, to Tarpon Springs, and then you go down through the Intercoastal Waterway in Florida. So there's land on both sides. Through Lake Okeechobee, land on both sides, to Stuart, Florida, and then you turn left again. And then you come back up the Intercoastal Waterway to Norfolk, and that's where it ends. That's mile marker 0. And then you go up to Chesapeake, land on your left side, and then you go through the Delaware Canal, land on both sides, down the Delaware River, land on both sides, up through the New Jersey Intercoastal Waterway, land on both sides. So
detecting a theme.
Yeah, right. And then you're up the Hudson. You go through New York. You're out in the Atlantic Ocean. Land on the left. Under the Verrazano Bridge. Big bridge. You can't miss it. Through New York. A lot of buildings on the right. Up the Hudson River to this big sign that says Erie Canal, turn left. So you turn left, you go through the Erie Canal, and next thing you know, you're Lake Erie, and you follow the land all the way up, back around, and down. So it's easy to do. It's not hard. You can't get lost.
So, well, that's good. For the people that might be geographically or navigationally challenged, that's a good thing. You said you bought a center console boat, not a center console. How big was it? And do you need, a particular size boat to get this done, or you can boat in anything?
You have to do what fits into your financial life. And this boat I could afford. Now, we've had people do the Great Loop on wave runners or jet skis, personal watercraft. Some people have done it on pontoon boats. The average size boat that does the loop is a 40-foot boat. And I did mine in segments because I was still working full time, but other people will do it over a full year. They're retired, they have the time. Lately, in the past couple of years, you have, with the pandemic going on, you have people who are working from home who are doing it, and they travel on the weekends, and during the week they're in a marina or they're anchored out and they got their Wi-Fi hotspots going, and they can work from the boat. So these people, it's like an RV. They have, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, a dining area, a work area, that type of thing. So we've had people do them in boats up to 65 feet. Yeah, big ones. But the average right now is about 40 feet. And I did mine's only a 20-footer. And
oh, wow. Okay.
When I went to buy my boat, I was going to buy an 18-footer. And the person I bought it from, great guy, Ty Kern, out of Pier 33 in St. Joseph, Michigan. Ty was a great guy. And goes, Mike, you want the 20-footer. Don't buy the 18-footer. And I go, no, I think I can do it on 18. He goes, no, Mike, trust me on this. So I said, okay. So then it came, I had a choice between a 150 horse or a 200 horse motor. And I said, I want the 200 horse. He goes, no, Mike, take the 150. It's less money. You'll burn less gas, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, I want the 200 horse. So I won on the 200 horse. He won on the 20-footer. And I'm glad I had the 200 horses. because when not using it on the loop but using it for fun, having extra horsepower is good for water skiing, having a bunch of people on the boat, getting it up, and that type of thing.
Yeah. And you had sleeping quarters and so forth in your boat, right?
No, there is no sleeping quarters.
Okay.
So, but I do have a porta potty on the boat that's never, ever, has never, ever been used since 2014 when we bought the boat. It hasn't, my wife is a trooper. So we have a pee cup on board the boat that we pee in, and any other things we do off the boat. So,
yes,
so what we would do is we would pull into a marina every night, and we'd go to a hotel or motel. And we would get off the boat, go to the hotel, check in, go out for a nice dinner. We'd meet the local townspeople, stuff like that, get a good night's sleep in a very comfortable bed, get up in the morning, have a nice breakfast, go to the boat, and then we'd take off on the next segment.
That doesn't sound like a bad life to me.
No, my wife liked it this way. She liked it a lot.
So I know you said you broke the trip up the loop up into segments. I mean, how long was a typical segment, just depending upon how much time you had, or?
So I would usually take about a week off of work. And so my first segment was, we were originally going to go in September of 2014, and I fell and broke my kneecap in August. So my mobility was very limited. And then, so we pushed it back to October, where the weather is a little bit colder, a little bit rainier. So we went a week. We started on a Sunday, and we pulled into Aqua Yacht Harbor in Iuka, Mississippi on a Saturday. So we went 6 days there, and then we had to get home from there, and we pulled in at noon, and Enterprise closed at noon, and we had to get to Memphis to fly home. So we ended up renting a Penske truck to drive to Memphis to take our flight home, which all worked out great. Except in 2014, we didn't have GPS and we didn't have a road map, and we had to figure out how to get to Memphis. But we did it. We found our way. And then we flew back the day after Thanksgiving, had a rent-a-car. We dropped it off right by the marina. And then from there we left, and we were unsure how far we would get. The hope was we would get as far as Mobile. And if we got lucky, we'd maybe get to Pensacola. And everything was in my favor. The locks worked perfectly. We had no delays. And we actually ended up in a 7-day time period getting to Tarpon Springs. And we left the boat in Tarpon Springs. We flew home from Tampa. So that's how we would do it. And then when we left the boat, I would find a marina that had a dry stack system, and they'd pull the boat out, would wash it down, put a cover on it, they'd put it away, and then I'd come back a month later, 6 months later, whatever it was, and then we'd do our next journey.
That's what I found so interesting, because, you're from the Chicagoland area. I live in, as you know, in the city of Chicago. I was trying to figure out how you did this, broke it up into segments like this, but storing it on dry racks makes all the sense in the world, and it clearly worked for you.
Right. Well, and when we're up in Albany, I talked to a guy who's going to pull the boat out of the water and leave it on land, because, if you leave it in water for too long, the bottom gets dirty, and I don't have bottom paint on mine. And he said, no problem, we'll take it, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay. So I came back, and the boat was never moved. So it was the bottom was as dirty as could be. And he goes, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to take it out. And I'm like, okay, you know what? So when we were in Buffalo, I got it acid washed in Buffalo, and that was fine. So those only 2 times it was left in the water. One was in Albany, and the other one was when we had some weather turn on us, and we left it in Port Austin, Michigan. And we left it there for like 10 days in the water, which wasn't bad. And, Mackinac Island, that was the third place. We left it up at Mackinac on the water. And then, fourth place. You got to, as you come along, Ludington, Michigan, we left it in the water. So So 4 places I left it in the water.
Most of which were in Michigan, it sounds like.
Well, Michigan, we were doing Michigan in August, end of August, September, and it was our worst weather. So we'd have small craft warnings and we couldn't travel or we'd pull in. So it didn't go as good as we wanted to. And then I was only doing it on weekends. We'd drive up to Ludington on a Friday, and then I'd go this far. We left the Mackinac on a Friday, and I got to Ludington. It's just those were like 2 or 3 day segments. So the shortest amount of distance took us the longest amount of time. But you know what? It was all fun. We're doing it again. We started it again. I mean,
oh, you did? I didn't know.
Oh that. Yeah, it was so much fun. I started it again, and I have to say, my wife Sharon is a trooper for allowing me to do this, and then coming along with me on certain segments of it. And she likes the boat, but she doesn't like the boat in the cold or in the rain, where it doesn't bother me. One of the guys from the AGLCA, by the name of Joe Pica, really knowledgeable. He's done the loop 6 times, and he calls me a polar bear because I'll be out there in November on Lake Michigan in my boat without a problem.
I'm kind of with your wife on this one. I don't being out in Lake Michigan in November does not sound like tons of fun to me, but
right.
I'm glad that you enjoy it.
You know what?
So
boating is my nirvana. I love being behind the wheel of a boat, just cruising along, seeing the scenery, looking at things. I forget all about work. I forget about incidentals. I'm at peace. And my wife realizes that, and she allows me to do this, and she comes along if it's sunny out, if it's warm out, if there's not a lot of waves. There's some, but she's good about it,
So would you go out by yourself if your wife wasn't up for that particular segment, or go with a friend? Or
so I did it. So the first time we're going, my son then was supposed to do the loop with me. He had a medical condition that required surgery, and I was going to go by myself. And then my brother Jim, Mr. Pontoon Boat, who ruined it in Cape Girardeau,
oh, yes.
He got into my wife's ear and said, "You can't let Mike go by himself. This is too dangerous, blah, blah, blah." So I found someone to go with me instead of my son. Tom Jackson, great guy, knew him from Boy Scouts. And I was looking for someone to go with, and I called my wife's cousin's husband, who was a retired Chicago policeman, who was a big boater. And I said, "Hey, do you want to come with?" Blah, blah, blah. And he goes, "Yeah, that sounds like fun. I'll let you know tomorrow." So he called me the next day, and he goes, "Where are we going to stay at night?" And I go, "I don't know." And he goes, "How far are we going to get?" I go, "I don't know." He goes, "How are we going to get home?" I go, "I don't know." And he goes, "I can't handle the stress of this, Mike. I don't want to go." And I said, "Okay." So Tom Jackson, he asked me the same 3 questions, and I answered, "I don't know." And he said, "This sounds like an adventure. Let's go do it." So, and we had a room to sleep every night. We had food every day, and we got home when we needed to get home. So it all worked out real well. So I did a couple parts of the loop by myself, up in the Michigan area, which is no big deal. At that point, my wife was pretty understood that it's not that big of a deal. So I only did 2 days by myself on the boat. The rest of the time, I always had someone with me.
I think also a lot of loopers, from what I understand, travel with buddy boats. Did you decide to go that route, or did you travel just, in your single boat most of the time?
I only did a buddy boat once because I travel at a greater speed than everyone else. So these people in these 40-foot boats are traveling between 6 and 9 miles an hour. And me and my little 20-footer, we scooted along at about 23 miles an hour. So there's no way to buddy boat. Now, Jonathan on a boat called Salty Dog reached out to me because he knew I was going to be up in New Jersey at the same time he was. And he got a hold of me. He goes, "Hey, we're crossing over to New York tomorrow." I said, "So am I." He goes, "Will you go with me?" And I said, "Yeah, let's buddy up." So we came out, and I was waiting out in the Atlantic for him, and he came out maybe 15 minutes later, and we headed north, and I was doing about 15 miles an hour, and he couldn't keep up with me. But my boat rode the waves better at 15. He went better at about 10. So what I did is I would go ahead, and then I'd stop, and I would bob around, and then he'd catch up. So we did it that way, kind of like a leapfrog type situation. There's a lot of camaraderie in doing the loop, and a lot of people like to buddy up. So then you have one person who makes the decisions and everyone else follows suit. And then they pull into the marinas together, or they'll anchor out together, and they will have dinner together. They'll have drinks together. And it's like hanging out with your next door neighbor. That's the best way to say it. But you get to choose who your next door neighbor is.
It is different every day.
Right. Or you can keep the same one. And when they buddy boat around, which is interesting, which is nice, is you could go off and do something else, and then 2 months later show up somewhere, and those are the people you traveled with 2 months prior for 5 days. So you can come in and out of these groups without a problem. There's no there's no rigidity that we have to do it all together simultaneously.
And I bet the scene at the docks with some of these people are interesting.
Yeah, you know what? We're all characters, okay? And
yes.
And we all have great wives who put up with us, okay? And so God bless them for letting their spouses do this and participating in it and enjoying it and having as much fun. Now, some of the women actually captain the boat, and the husband is the deckhand. And a lot of the gentlemen say their wives are better at docking the boat than they are. And they'll handle the lines, and their wife will dock it. I have Bob and his wife. She's the captain, and he's the first mate. And they've done the great loop in this 50-foot boat. And when they go out, she's running the boat, and he's the engineer. He says, "I'm the chief engineer." So, you know what? So it's teamwork. I'm part of the people.
I'm sure this is going to be hard for you to narrow down, and there's probably several favorites, I suspect. But what was your favorite part of this whole adventure?
Okay, so I had what I call bucket list items that I wanted to do. So one of them was, and I've been blessed that I've been traveling a lot, and I've been to Annapolis several times, but I wanted to bring my own boat into Annapolis Harbor, past all those multi-million-dollar yachts. And so, and I love Annapolis as a city. So that was something really cool. And my wife and I talked about this, is driving my own boat past the Statue of Liberty, because that's very awe-inspiring. So my wife is a nurse, and she's working at a hospital in Chicago, and they're rolling out new computers. And while she wasn't directly involved in the computer rollout, she felt it was necessary for her to be there. So we had some weather issues and stuff along New Jersey, and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to do the Statue of Liberty on this trip. And I promised my wife that she would be on the boat when I went past the Statue of Liberty. So that was a bucket list item, and everything fell into place. And we went past the Statue of Liberty. We came back. We went over to a marina. We docked the boat, went to a hotel. Sharon took a shower and hopped on the United flight out of Newark back to Chicago, where she worked at. And then I get this phone call, and it's my son, John, who lived in Denver. And he said, "Hey, I'm at the Newark airport. What hotel are you at?" And he flew in. And he did the trip up to Albany with me, and I think my wife convinced him to go so I wouldn't be on the boat alone. So he spent 3 days with me going up to Albany, and that was great. So those were my two big, going into Annapolis, going past Statue of Liberty. The Erie Canal was phenomenal, just phenomenal. And then there's a place called the Dismal Swamp, and it's the oldest canal in the United States. It was actually started by George Washington. And my son Mikey did the Dismal Canal with me, or the Dismal Swamp with me, and that was just spectacularly beautiful. It was unbelievably great. But every part of this loop is different from the other part, and it's just, going down the Mississippi past the arch in St. Louis. It's just cool. And just coming back into Chicago and seeing the Hancock Building and the Willis Tower. It's just, and the Chicago Lakefront, which is just absolutely gorgeous by boat. So there's just so many little things. Pulling in the Mackinac Island, and seeing Mackinac on your own boat. It's fun. It's something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I will never buy into this Willis Tower business, though, Mike. I got to tell you.
It's the Sears Tower.
Sears may be hanging by a thread, but it's still the Sears Tower in my book.
Well, I'm finally calling it the United Center. I used to call it the Stadium for the longest amount of time. So, and it's still White Sox Park or Comiskey Park. It's not whatever they
absolutely.
call it.
Whatever it is now. I don't even know. Guaranteed rate or whatever it is. So, what advice would you have for boaters out there who might be interested in thinking about completing the Great Loop?
So, well, the first thing is to get education. Understand how to operate your boat, know the rules of the road, and be safe. The second thing is make sure all your safety equipment on board the ship, on the boat, is good and operational. Wear a life jacket all the time. And then there's a company called Waterway Guides. And remember the old American Express commercial where it says, Carl Malden said, "Don't leave home without it." That's the way I feel with the Waterway Guides. They are broken into segments and talks about the route, talks about the cities, talks about marinas. A lot of great information in there. I had paper charts I like to use to get an overview of what's going on, to plan out where you're going. Now, it's good to have a plan, but it's bad to have a schedule. Because if you need to be in a certain place by a certain time, then you make mistakes or you push on a weather envelope and bad things can happen. So good planning, good thought process, have fun, don't sweat the little things, just keep moving forward.
You had the map, at least overview maps printed out. Did you also use GPS navigation, electronics in the boat?
So it's funny you said that, because when I was buying the boat and ordering it, Ty, who is very good to me, he said, "Oh, Mike, you got to buy a chart plotter." And I go, "What do I need a chart plotter for?" He goes, "Oh, get a chart plotter." And he goes, I go, I'll go buy a cheap one, I'll put it on the dashboard. He goes, "That's stupid, Mike. Get the chart plotter." So I put it in, and it's a Garmin Echo chart plotter, has a depth finder on it. And it's just like a GPS road map, Siri on your phone. It lays out a whole course for you. And then you can type in GPS coordinates of the entrance to a marina, a harbor, or whatever, and it'll show you exactly where it is and that type of thing. So, yeah, I had the electronic charts when I was moving, but that was permanently on the boat. So when I was in the hotel at night, I'd pull out my laptop, look at. Now, I'm not telling you to do a fellow boater to do this, but I would look at Google Maps, love Google Maps, but you don't use Google Maps for navigating. That's a bad thing. But it gives you a good overview on what's going on. And then I would have a lot of paper charts that I would use. Like I had paper charts for the Illinois River. I had it for the Mississippi River. I had it for Kentucky Lakes. I had it for the Tom-Bigby Waterway. And then I had them for the different parts of the intercoastal. So I could get a thing, and then I had my chart plotter, and that worked out really well.
That makes tons of sense. Thanks so much for being here today, Mike. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I'm intrigued by each of you who decide to undertake this adventure. For people interested in learning more about the Great Loop, there's a couple of resources that I'd like to point them to. First, I'd encourage people to consider joining the America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. Membership is $89 a year, I believe, and they have a lot of great resources, including, I think, a forum where you can ask experienced loopers questions to get really valuable feedback and information. There's also a couple of Facebook groups out there with pretty large membership and a lot of experienced loopers. Also a good place to post some questions. So thanks again, Mike.
You're most welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating podcast. Is it almost time for routine maintenance on your outboard or Mercruiser marine engine? Check out our easy-to-use maintenance kits at PartsVu.com. And for free shipping, use the coupon code PVTalksBoating, a special perk for our podcast listeners. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for boating knowledge, to keep in touch with the PartsVu community, and for special sales and promotions. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and check out the show notes for the coupon code just mentioned, more information about PartsVu and the products we offer, as well as our boating blog, the PartsVu Xchange. And a big thanks to Min for performing the original music featured within this podcast.